The celebration was supposed to be simple, predictable, and safe. Rows of folding chairs stretched across the field, set up early that morning by volunteers who had done this every year without incident. The grass was still damp, and the air carried that mix of sunscreen, fresh paper programs, and nervous excitement that only graduation seemed to have. Parents adjusted sunglasses and squinted toward the stage. Grandparents clutched small bouquets wrapped in plastic. Phones were already raised, ready to capture the exact second a name would be called. For the students, this was the finish line. 12 years of early mornings, late-night homework, lockers slammed in frustration, and friendships tested by time had led to this moment. Gowns rustled as they shifted in their seats. Caps were tilted and retied, tassels fussed over more than once. Every face held some version of relief. Some smiled wide. Others stared straight ahead, trying not to think about what came next. But for a few hours, none of that mattered. This was about recognition, about being seen. When the ceremony began, everything followed the familiar rhythm. The opening music played slightly too loud. A school official tapped the microphone and cleared their throat. Names of scholarship recipients were read, each one followed by polite applause. The crowd settled into that shared patience that comes from knowing everyone has to wait their turn. There was no sense that anything could go wrong. This was a controlled environment, managed down to the minute. Then the order cracked. It started small, almost easy to ignore. A voice cutting through the speaker's words. A complaint muttered too loudly. A parent standing when everyone else remained seated. Ushers exchanged quick looks, but stayed where they were. These things happened sometimes. Stress ran high on days like this. People traveled long distances, rearranged work schedules, pinned a lot of emotion onto a single hour. Most disruptions fizzled out on their own. This one didn't. The voice grew sharper, louder, fueled by impatience and entitlement. It wasn't just about a seat or a blocked view. It was about rules, about who thought they mattered more than the rest. The calm, respectful tone of the ceremony clashed hard with the anger cutting through it. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Phones lowered, not to record a proud moment now, but to see what was happening. Security moved closer, trying to de-escalate, but the energy had shifted. What had been a celebration began to feel fragile. Parents leaned toward their children. Students on the field looked confused, then uneasy. The stage, meant to be a symbol of achievement, suddenly felt exposed. The shouting escalated into physical movement. Chairs scraped against the ground. Someone stepped forward too aggressively. Another person responded in kind. The space between words and actions disappeared fast. The line that separates frustration from violence blurred in real time, and everyone present felt it. The air seemed tighter, heavier, as if the entire crowd was holding its breath. For the families who had waited years for this moment, it was surreal. Pride collided with fear. Joy gave way to alertness. Some parents instinctively stood, scanning for exits. Others stayed frozen, torn between protecting their children and not making the situation worse. The graduates, still seated in their gowns, were no longer just students. They were witnesses to something that didn't belong in this space. A ceremony designed to mark growth and maturity was now overshadowed by the rawest display of the opposite. The contrast was jarring. On one side, young adults stepping into responsibility. On the other, grown individuals losing control in public over something that should have been minor. The applause had stopped entirely. All attention was locked on the disturbance, whether people wanted it or not. In moments like this, time stretches. Seconds feel longer. Every movement seems louder. The sense of safety that everyone assumes at events like these starts to erode. The question shifts from when the next name will be called to whether someone is going to get hurt. Parents grip armrests harder. A few students glance toward their families, searching for reassurance. What should have been a shared memory of pride was being rewritten in front of them, turning into something tense and unpredictable, with no clear sense of how far it might go or who would be caught in the middle. Rules exist so moments like this can belong to everyone. That understanding is usually unspoken, quietly accepted by people who line up, wait their turn, and follow instructions because they know the alternative is chaos. At graduations, those rules are simple. Sit where you're told. Keep aisles clear. Let each name be heard. Respect the fact that every family has waited just as long as you have. Most people follow them without thinking twice. But all it takes is one person deciding the rules don't apply to them. It began with resistance. A refusal to sit down when asked. A sharp response to a polite reminder. The tone shifted from confused to confrontational almost instantly. What should have been a brief correction turned into a standoff, fueled by pride and a need to be right in front of an audience. The more attention it drew, the less willing anyone involved was to back down. Staff members tried to intervene, keeping their voices calm, choosing words carefully. They pointed to posted guidelines. They gestured to open seats. They reminded the individuals involved that the ceremony needed to continue. Instead of easing the situation, each attempt seemed to harden it. Compliance began to feel, to those being corrected, like humiliation. And humiliation often breeds anger. Voices grew louder. Hands started moving, not yet striking, but no longer still. The emotional temperature of the crowd rose with every exchanged word. People nearby shifted uncomfortably, caught between wanting to watch and wanting it to stop. Some murmured encouragement. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The focus was no longer on what was right, but on who would win the argument. Rules, once challenged, invite others to test them. A second person stepped in, not to calm things down, but to defend. Allegiances formed in seconds. What was once a simple issue of order became a public power struggle. The more people involved, the less anyone could remember how it had started. All that mattered now was standing ground. Emotions fed on each other. Anger sparked defensiveness. Defensiveness turned into aggression. The body language alone was enough to signal danger. Shoulders squared. Jaws tightened. Space was invaded deliberately. The line between words and action narrowed to almost nothing. Those closest to the confrontation could feel it, that unmistakable sense that something was about to tip. Students on the field felt it too. They had been told their whole lives that days like this were milestones, proof that discipline and effort paid off. Now they were watching adults model the opposite. The irony wasn't lost on them. Some stared straight ahead, pretending not to see. Others looked toward the stands, searching for familiar faces, trying to read whether this was something to fear or just another embarrassing adult moment. Parents reacted in instinctive ways. Some rose to their feet, ready to step in if things turned physical. Others grabbed their phones, torn between recording and calling for help. A few tried to calm nearby children, whispering reassurances they weren't fully sure of themselves. The sense of shared trust that holds public events together began to unravel. Security presence increased, but authority alone couldn't undo the emotional momentum that had built. Each request to calm down was met with resistance, as if backing off now would mean admitting fault. No one wanted to be the first to yield. The rules that were supposed to guide behavior were now being treated as obstacles, not safeguards. At its core, the conflict wasn't about seating or procedure. It was about control, about feeling seen, about refusing to be corrected in front of others. And once those emotions took over, logic had no place. The ceremony's structure, its schedule, its purpose all faded into the background, replaced by raw reactions and unchecked egos. The escalation didn't happen all at once. It climbed steadily, step by step, fueled by every raised voice and every ignored instruction. What should have been resolved quietly instead became something everyone would remember, a reminder of how quickly order can collapse when rules are challenged and emotions are allowed to lead without restraint. While most eyes were drawn to the noise and movement, one mother noticed something else. She saw the shift before it fully announced itself. The tightening of shoulders. The way voices stopped overlapping and started aiming. The subtle change in posture that signaled people were no longer just arguing, but preparing. Years of experience had trained her to recognize that moment when tension stops being emotional and starts becoming physical. She didn't react the way others did. She didn't stand abruptly or shout for attention. Her breathing slowed instead of quickening. Her gaze moved deliberately, scanning the space not for drama but for threats. She noted who was involved, how close they were to the graduates, where security was positioned, and which exits were closest. While others were still trying to understand what was happening, she already knew where it could lead. Her first thought wasn't about embarrassment or inconvenience. It was about her son. He sat out there in his cap and gown, focused on the stage, trusting that the adults in the stands would keep this moment safe. She understood that trust carried weight. It meant responsibility. It meant readiness. She couldn't afford panic, because panic spreads fast and makes situations worse. She watched the body language carefully. The way one person leaned forward just a little too much. The way another clenched their fists and planted their feet. She recognized those signals the same way someone recognizes a familiar language. They told her exactly how close things were to crossing a line. And once that line was crossed, there would be no easy way back. Around her, other parents were reacting emotionally. Some were angry, muttering under their breath. Some were scared, eyes wide, hands gripping armrests. A few were frozen, unsure whether to intervene or stay put. She understood all of it. Those reactions were natural, but she also knew they weren't helpful. Her training had taught her that chaos thrives on uncertainty. When people don't know what to do, they either overreact or shut down. Neither option protects anyone. So she stayed still, grounded, present. Her calm wasn't passive. It was intentional. It was the kind of calm built through repetition, through exposure to situations where losing control could cost lives. She shifted slightly in her seat, positioning herself for a clear path if she needed to move. She noted obstacles without staring at them. She adjusted her posture so she could stand quickly without drawing attention. Everything she did looked ordinary to anyone watching, but every movement had purpose behind it. Her awareness extended beyond the confrontation itself. She watched how the crowd was responding. Who was edging closer? Who was pulling away? Who might step in for the wrong reasons? She understood that well-meaning people often make situations worse when they act on impulse. One shove, one shouted insult, one misread gesture could ignite everything. She didn't assume someone else would handle it. She never had. Responsibility, once felt, doesn't disappear just because there are uniforms nearby. She respected security, but she also knew response times and limitations. She knew how quickly things could change in a dense crowd with limited space. Her focus never left the bigger picture. This wasn't about winning an argument or proving a point. It was about keeping the situation contained, about preventing fear from turning into panic, about ensuring that when her son's name was finally called, he would walk across that stage without carrying this chaos with him. She was ready to act, but she wasn't eager to. The goal was never confrontation. It was control. Control of herself first, because that was the only thing she could truly command. From there, everything else followed. As the tension continued to build, she remained alert, steady, and prepared, recognizing that the most dangerous moments often arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary seconds when no one else realizes how close things really are. When the moment finally demanded action, her body responded before her mind had time to second-guess. Training has a way of bypassing hesitation, replacing it with muscle memory shaped by repetition and consequence. She didn't rush forward blindly or react emotionally. She moved with precision, aware of how every step, every gesture, would either calm the situation or escalate it further. She stood smoothly, not abruptly, so as not to draw unnecessary attention. Her posture changed in a way that communicated confidence without aggression. Shoulders back, chin level, hands visible. These were not accidental choices. They were signals meant to project authority while avoiding threat. People often respond to what they sense before they process what they see, and she understood that instinctively. Her voice, when she used it, was measured and clear. Not loud, not sharp. Calm carries farther than shouting ever does. She spoke only when necessary, choosing words that redirected rather than challenged. There was no insult in her tone, no need to dominate. The goal wasn't to win. It was to stabilize. She positioned herself strategically, not directly in the center of the conflict, but close enough to influence it. Angles mattered. Distance mattered. Standing too close could provoke. Standing too far would be ineffective. She placed herself where she could be seen without becoming the focus. That balance is hard to find without practice. The people involved in the disturbance noticed her presence almost immediately, even if they couldn't explain why. Something about her stillness disrupted the emotional momentum they had built. Anger thrives on reaction. When it doesn't get one, it often loses its footing. She gave them nothing to push against. She watched their breathing, their eye movement, the tension in their hands. She adjusted her approach in real time, slowing things down when she saw agitation spike, pressing gently when she sensed hesitation. This was communication without confrontation, control without force. The same principles she had relied on in far more dangerous environments now applied here, in a crowded graduation field. Others nearby began to mirror her calm without realizing it. Voices lowered. Movements became less erratic. A few people stepped back instead of forward. Emotional regulation is contagious when it's strong enough. She had seen it work before, in places where the stakes were much higher than a disrupted ceremony. She remained aware of her surroundings at all times. She never turned her back completely. She kept potential escape routes in mind. She noticed when security drew closer and subtly adjusted to complement their presence rather than compete with it. Coordination matters, even when it's unspoken. At no point did she allow personal emotion to surface. Pride, anger, fear, all stayed contained. This wasn't the time for them. Those feelings could be processed later. In the moment, they were liabilities. What mattered was clarity, restraint, and timing. Her actions sent a quiet message to everyone watching. Strength doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't need volume or spectacle. Sometimes it looks like someone who refuses to be pulled into chaos, who stands steady while others lose balance. The situation didn't resolve instantly. De-escalation rarely does. It unfolds in small shifts, in pauses that give people space to reconsider. She allowed those pauses to exist, resisting the urge to rush an outcome. Control isn't about speed. It's about direction. As the energy slowly changed, she stayed exactly where she needed to be, ready to adjust again if necessary. Trusting the training that had taught her how to move through moments like this without force, without fear, and without losing sight of what she was there to protect. Violence promises power, but it rarely delivers anything lasting. In moments like this, when tempers flare and adrenaline rises, it can feel like force is the fastest solution. Push harder. Speak louder. Make someone back down. But she understood something many people never learn. Violence escalates situations. Control ends them. She never raised her voice, even when others did. Volume wasn't necessary. Authority doesn't come from sound. It comes from presence, from certainty, from the refusal to be pulled into someone else's chaos. While others tried to overpower the situation emotionally, she reduced it, stripping away its fuel piece by piece. Restraint took effort. It always does. The instinct to react is powerful, especially when someone threatens a moment meant to honor your child. Anger would have been justified. Force would have been understandable. But justified reactions can still cause harm. She knew that once physical lines were crossed, there would be no clean resolution. Someone would get hurt. Someone would be arrested. The ceremony would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. Instead of matching aggression, she redirected it. She acknowledged emotions without validating behavior. She addressed actions, not egos. That distinction mattered. People who feel attacked defend themselves. People who feel seen, even briefly, often pause. That pause was the opening she needed. She gave people an out without shaming them. A chance to step back without losing face. That kind of restraint requires confidence. It means not needing to prove strength because you already know you have it. She didn't posture. She didn't threaten. She didn't crowd anyone's space. She let her composure speak. The contrast was impossible to ignore. On one side, clenched fists and raised voices. On the other, controlled breathing and steady eye contact. The difference exposed the imbalance. It became clear who was reacting and who was deciding. That clarity shifted the dynamic more effectively than any physical intervention could have. Others watching began to understand the lesson unfolding in real time. Strength doesn't have to look like dominance. It can look like patience under pressure. like knowing when not to act, like choosing the outcome over the impulse. Those lessons were being absorbed quietly, not just by the adults in the stands, but by the graduates on the field. Her restraint protected more than just her son's moment. It protected the people around her from being pulled into something they didn't choose. It protected the staff from a situation spiraling beyond their control. It protected those who were angry from consequences they couldn't take back. This wasn't about suppressing emotion. It was about mastering it. She felt everything anyone else would have felt. The frustration, the threat, the injustice of it. But feelings don't have to dictate behavior. Training had taught her that discipline isn't the absence of emotion. It's the ability to act wisely in spite of it. As the tension eased, it became clear how close things had come to turning physical. How easily one shove or one insult could have changed everything. That awareness lingered. People began to shift not because they were forced to, but because they recognized the alternative. Restraint allowed dignity to remain intact. No one was humiliated publicly. No one had to be dragged away. The situation de-escalated without spectacle. That mattered. Dignity, once lost, is hard to recover. Especially in front of children, in front of a crowd, in front of a moment meant to celebrate growth. What stood out most wasn't what she did, but what she refused to do. She refused to let anger take control. Refused to meet disrespect with force. Refused to let violence define the day. That refusal carried more weight than any physical response ever could, reshaping the moment quietly, decisively, and with intention. Long after the chairs were folded and the field cleared, the lesson lingered. It settled in quietly, not as a dramatic story retold with exaggeration, but as a memory people carried with them, shaped by what they had witnessed. For some, it surfaced as reflection. For others, as discomfort. But it stayed, because moments like that have a way of revealing truth. The graduates would remember it in their own way, not as the chaos itself, but as the contrast. They had just been told, in speeches and slogans, about responsibility, leadership, and maturity. Then they saw those ideas tested in real time. They watched how quickly things could unravel when emotions took over, and how quickly they could be steadied when someone chose discipline instead. That lesson carried more weight than any line spoken from the stage. Parents, too, took something from it. Some recognized themselves in the anger they saw and felt uneasy about it. Others felt relief that the situation hadn't gone further. Many understood, perhaps for the first time, how fragile shared spaces really are. How much they rely on individual choices. How easily a moment meant for everyone can be hijacked by a few. The staff and volunteers learned something as well. Procedures matter, but so does presence. Rules are important, but enforcement without composure can inflame rather than resolve. They saw how authority paired with calm could redirect a situation more effectively than force. That understanding would quietly shape how they approached future events. The individuals who caused the disruption were left with their own reckoning. Anger burns hot, but it fades, leaving behind the weight of consequences and the clarity of hindsight. Whether they admitted it or not, they had been shown another way to respond. They had seen restraint hold the ground they tried to claim through volume and aggression. The son, at the center of it all without fully realizing it, walked away with a memory layered with meaning. He saw his mother not as a hero or a spectacle, but as a steady presence when it mattered. He learned that strength doesn't always announce itself. That leadership often looks quiet. That protecting a moment sometimes means refusing to fight for it the way others expect. This was the kind of lesson that extends beyond a single afternoon. It echoes in future choices, in how someone responds to conflict at work, in how they handle disrespect in public, in whether they escalate or de-escalate when emotions run high. The example set that day offered a blueprint, even if no one explicitly called it that. Accountability took on a broader meaning. It wasn't just about rules or consequences. It was about owning one's behavior, especially when it's hardest to do so. The situation made it clear that accountability isn't something imposed from the outside. It begins internally, with the decision to act with restraint instead of impulse. Respect, too, was redefined, not as obedience or silence, but as consideration for others. for their time, for their milestones, for their safety. The disruption highlighted what happens when respect is absent, but the response demonstrated what it looks like when it's upheld under pressure. The lesson wasn't delivered through punishment or shame. It was shown through example. That made it harder to dismiss, harder to argue against. People could disagree with words, but they couldn't ignore what they had seen. A volatile situation met with composure. A potential fight diffused without force. A celebration preserved because someone chose control over reaction. Those who were there would carry that image forward, whether they realized it or not. In moments when tempers flared again, when rules felt inconvenient, when ego tempted them to push back, something from that day would surface. A pause, a memory, a reminder that there is another way to respond, one that protects dignity, preserves peace, and leaves a mark long after the noise fades.